My name is Will Kayatin, and we are live at the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative's Holler Broadcasting Studio, and it is September 28th. It's another beautiful day here in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky, and I am joined by three terrific colleagues, and we've got a wonderful professional learning experience to share with you today. So with that, I'm going to hush and step aside, and our guests are going to introduce themselves. Dr. Lobianco.
I think most of you probably know me. I'm Tony Lobianco. I'm the director of the Kentucky Post-School Outcomes Center at the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. And I oversee the Yo-Yo, the Youth 1 Year Out former student interview.
I'll introduce myself. My name's Rachel Baker. I'm originally from Harlan County, grew up there. That's where my roots are. And I moved to Nicholasville, and currently I am the Associate Director of Special Education for Fayette County Public Schools. And prior to that, I worked in Jessamine County as a special ed teacher and a high school guidance counselor.
I'm Dana Hamilton. I'm the Achievement and Compliance Coach. I serve some of the schools here in Lexington. I'm originally from Rockcastle County. I taught MSD for 17 years, and I've been with Fayette County since 2011, and I assist with the Yo-Yo interviews each year for our high schools.
Great, thank you. Well, so I think most of our viewing and listening audience knows that the 2021 Yo-Yo came to an end about a month ago. Now we're recording this on September 28th, and it closed on August 30th. And we don't have the results yet, but we do have the response rates. And one of the things that I noticed, and a lot of my colleagues noticed right away, was just the amazing response rate that Fayette County had. It was at 98% this year. And when I say response rate, what I mean is that they actually were able to contact and complete an interview with 98% of their former students, or in some cases parents. I think you guys can speak more to that maybe, but that's kind of an unheard of response rate especially for a sizable district like Fayette County is. So I thought it would be a great idea to get your story and be able to share it with others in the hopes that maybe they can learn something from what you've done. And we can see that rate go up statewide. So my first question is kind of the big question. And, it wasn't too many years ago that Fayette County was not in such a great situation. It's not like former students in Fayette County are just more likely to answer their phones than anywhere else. In 2014, you actually only had a 9% response rate. And then in 2015, it jumped to 39%. 2016, you got above 60%, or it's just 67%. And we usually tell districts that we are shooting for a 60% response rate. So you were ahead of the game then in 2016, and you stayed right in the 60s for about 4 years until in 2020, you jumped again to 92%. And then this past year, 98%. And like I say, you're a big district. So that's not, 9 out of 10 students or something like that. That's actually, by the numbers, it's 203 out of 208 former students that you were able to contact. So the big question is, how did you get to such a high percentage rate of responses?
Well, over the years, and I've been in this position throughout those years that you mentioned. And when I think about how we started out with just kind of getting the Yo-Yo done and figuring it out and getting people in place to interview. And I think that was the key. Is you hear districts talk about the right people in the right seats. That really became one of the keys. In 2014, I had some summer employees, and I thought my parent resource center people would be great. Parents talking to parents, getting information. And then I kind of analyzed, well, what happened there? How did that break down? And I spoke to my interviewers. And so the next thing that I did is I moved on to another group of colleagues that I have, my employment trainers, who, work with a lot of families as they're at that grade 12, grade 14 as they exit here in Fayette County. Because as I thought back, I look at our district and I think about the transient rate and I think about all the reasons that, we can't get our response rate up. And then I said, okay, I got to find the reasons that we can versus focusing on why we're kind of stuck here. So in 2016, I decided to just take it back to the school level because the achievement and compliance coaches, which Dana holds that position at Dunbar High School and a couple of our agencies, is letting them start to call. Even though at the end of the year is quite a busy time in a school district, when you're getting testing ready, you're doing a whole lot of things. But I thought if we want to get our response rate up, I've got to find the key people to contact them. So I started working with them, and that's when we were in the 60s. And then I think I got a little competitive with myself about every year I kind of, want to up that because I get a lot of data in Fayette County. We're very data rich. If people aren't aware, but I oftentimes get data that's not actionable. And in order for us to improve our outcomes for kids, which is a passion that I have, I had to figure out, so how can I get data that's really going to be useful to how we look at services for kids, how we make connections after high school, how we improve all of these outcomes that we talk about. So 2016 kind of started the training for that group. And making sure they trained, of course, with HDI, with the interview process. I also started looking at things about, so a lot of our families have cell phones. A lot of our families, those cell phone numbers transition. The information in IC is not always quite up to date at the end of the year. So I started thinking about, so why would I answer my phone and complete this survey? I get those phone calls all the time. And so for me, that became who the people are, even where the phone call is coming from. Because if you're offsite or not in Fayette County, and making phone calls and using other numbers, people oftentimes aren't going to answer those random numbers. So Fayette County, everything's 381. So making sure that parents saw that and thought, oh, the school's calling me, because we are that last connection before that real world. And oftentimes kids after high school need a lot of things from their high school in terms of paperwork or in terms of connections or things like that. So we made sure that we were making phone calls from that number. So once we got there and kind of analyzed that, it just kept going up. And the high schools, Dana will laugh because we talk about the art of diggery at the high school. It's not a real thing. It's just a Fayette County thing, I think. But being able to dig down and really find the kid, find the right people, those kind of things. So one of the things that we did was at the end of the year, you do a summary of performance. And so we kind of changed that form. We kept the essentials that our co-op requires, but we started adding a lot of things to that. For example, we talked about on that contact form, who are some of your friends that are still going to be in school with us next year? All the social media, the Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, everything that students use, we started kind of expanding on that form, which gave us the ability to do that diggery. And I'll let Dana talk a little bit about that because she's like the live person doing that. So Dana is what I will call my last resort, is if you get a call from Dana. I have worked through the school levels. I have worked through me. I have focused on even getting a hold of the dropouts because I do that at the end of the year. So Dana and I are the last resort. If you hear from us, we have tracked you down, I guess is the best way to say it. So Dana can give you some of that real live experience.
Yeah, I mean, I usually do like multiple attempts. Like I don't stop at 3. I'll like search them down on Facebook. I'll see if their parents are connected to them on Facebook, because sometimes I can, contact the parents that way. I send private messages to them. I was telling Rachel, I had a kid that was working and he sent me a private message on Facebook at 12 o'clock at night. And he says, "It's too late to call." And I'm like, nope. So I was doing a yo-yo interview at 1 o'clock in the morning. So, I just don't stop. I keep looking for those kids, and social media has really been a great outlet to do that, because so many kids are on social media in some form or fashion. So I've been able to do a lot of contacts that way.
One of the big things that we always hear is that districts have a difficult time contacting former students because the contact information is out of date. And it sounds like you've had a great way of going about making sure that you either get it up to date or you find the former student via another means. And I assume that doesn't happen overnight. You talked about how it sometimes it starts at their summer performance before they leave high school, and sometimes I guess you have to kind of track them down on the run. Is there anything more you can say about that, or strategies for other districts that might be in a similar position?
I think that summary performance is, if for Fayette County, is that conversation. It starts with working with the case manager, the person that maybe that student or family has known for probably at least 2 years, if not even 4 years, through case management. And so I think when they sit down with the kids, it's that very first personal contact versus somebody from the district just calling. Because Dana works at one of our high schools, but at each high school, I have that person that runs all of the meetings, the achievement and compliance coaches. And so the case managers start, and the kids feel comfortable. They're willing to give that information, because I just know when I was a high school teacher, that of all the positions that I ever had as a high school teacher, my students kept in touch with me, whether it's social media, whether it's you run into them, in the district and you see them working or anything like that. So teachers are really where I think everything starts. And it's hard to have teachers work all summer and do yo-yo, if that makes sense. But that summary performance is the opportunity for those case managers who have the closest connection to get the information from the students. And then Dana may not say this about herself, but I'll say this. Dana has a real great approach with working with parents with any kind of background or any kind of need. And she's always following through. And I think that shows in yo-yo is her conversational approach with just, hey, we want to see what's going on with your student. She kind of presents the yo-yo as an opportunity to share what's going on. And also, my ACCs are really good about following up with me and saying, this parent asked about so-and-so, can you give them a call? And so that follow through for our district is so important. That puts an ease for the majority of our parents, I think, and also for our students. I think just to hear from somebody, that was at their high school or can update them about the happenings, I guess, in Fayette County, when you leave high school, you lose a lot of social connection in a lot of ways. So just beginning with those case managers and that genuine relationship, I think kids are willing to give information. And then when somebody actually contacts them, some of them are probably a little shocked, like, how did you track me down? But those are great stories then for us. We get to kind of laugh about, Dana and I get to laugh about the 1 o'clock in the morning. I said, you're doing yo-yo at 1 o'clock in the morning? And she's like, yeah, this kid texted me back and I've got to talk to him. So.
And where they're at. That's great. It sounds like building relationships is really essential, as well as being intentional about knowing that you're going to need that information in the future. So you alluded to this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about the interviewers that you use? I mean, obviously you have Dana, but you said she's kind of like she's the closer, maybe.
That's it. Yeah.
But how do you identify and encourage other interviewers to be as engaged as they are, and how do you divide former students by the interviewers that you have?
Well, I have Dana's position exists at each of our A1 high schools, of which we have 6, and then we have 8 or 9 programs outside of that, but all of our kids exit from their home high school. So her position, the achievement and compliance coach, which they have all the meetings with the parents, they're the due process people at the school. So they've gotten to know them probably for 4 years. The kids have been there. This is the person that calls when I need a meeting. So I use each of them at the high school to do that. And to be honest, some are better than others. Some personalities suit interviewing parents better than others. Some have more experience. Dana's been doing it, I think, as long as we've been doing yo-yo. And so I just have to kind of build that team up, but it does start with relationships. This is a person that's called parents when there's, kids getting ready to graduate, making sure things are in place. This is the person in the meeting that advocates for your kid and for what you need. It's the person that mediates those, discipline issues, or mediates those accomplishments or assessments, evaluations, the mediator of the Office of Voc Rehab. So really a lot of the parents have already built a relationship. They're not an unknown. And I think I learned that through the years, because I thought parents calling parents would really work. And it probably worked to some degree. And then I went to my employment trainers who worked with them, like I said, transition wise. But I really just got to the point that it needs to be somebody's school level that they have built a relationship with. And I know in smaller districts, sometimes it can just be the director of special ed that's making those phone calls. And so I really try to work with people at the school level. I think that's essential because they've already built a relationship under circumstances that may be good and may not have been such a good experience for parents, but they're still hanging in with them. So they do the training with HDI, and then we talk a little bit about the contacts, the 3 contacts that you make. And I look at the data probably weekly, or, Tony, I get an email from you and spawns me, Rachel, get on there and look at it. And so when I start looking at it, you can even see which of my ACCs might be doing better making the contacts. Have they had the opportunity to do the 3 contacts? So like you said, Dana is the closer for me. And there are several people that will get 100% at their high school, and Dana never makes a phone call there. But that last group of kids, sometimes I feel like is the closing of my data for me to plan for the next year. Because if I don't have something to really look at, we're just kind of stagnant. And so I value yo-yo quite a bit for as we plan for our next steps for our kids. So I don't know if that helps you, but.
It does. And I think it's worth noting too that, we were in touch a lot during this window. I think I got an email from one of the 2 of you almost every day. and that was not a problem at all. It was great. I was glad to see that you were investing the time and energy. It took a lot of work. I'm sure it did.
Well, and I told Dana, I said, there are just 5 kids left.
Yeah.
We can't find those 5 kids. And she was like, okay, I've tried.
Yeah,
So-
she would call me or text me every day and say, are we at 100% yet? Oh.
So I do think it's good, the people that do yo-yo, that as the associate director, which I work with the high schools primarily and the programs, is just to have that relationship too in leadership with the people I ask to do this, because I don't ask people to do any more than I'm willing to do. And so Dana and I kind of work together. When I'm not up at 1 a.m., but when we're working together, it's a constant kind of check-in. And I think that's really important as you set your goals. And every year I do set a goal for yo-yo. A comment was made to me about, well, what are you going to do? Don't get too high, because what are you going to do next year? And I realize I might fall from 98%, but still, I think for a survey to get that much feedback, I feel like it's valuable. And even if I'm at 90%, I'm kind of okay with that, I guess. But
No, you're not.
No, well, I try to be. So
I think 90% is great, and 98% is just phenomenal. So, I wonder, even when you have that good contact information, when you get somebody on the phone, just to get them to go ahead and talk to you must be difficult. Do you have strategies to encourage their participation, or what do you do to keep them on the phone? Because I know I love messing with telemarketers.
Well, I think it just started with kind of emphasizing to my ACCs. I think they dreaded it, but then I think you start to see the interest, and it's nice to know where kids ended up. It's nice to know that those kids that for 4 years you fought for kind of made it. But I always tell Dana, I think it's that approach that's really important in working with families. And like I said, I compliment her because she has that approach that's very genuine. And I believe that parents see genuineness even in a survey. If you have an interest in, so what's going on, what resources can we help with? So her introduction, I'll let her talk a little bit about that, because I think her introduction to families is so important. Because remember, she's at Dunbar High School. She's calling 5 other high schools that she has no real relationship with those kids, and getting the ones that have been most difficult maybe to track down, or even the ones that on 3 attempts never called us back. So you want to talk about how you approach that?
Yeah, when I call, I mean, I've done yo-yos so often and so much that I'm really familiar with the questions and the process. So I will have it in front of me and kind of go through it. But when I first start, I kind of just start with a conversation, hey, I introduce myself, and I'll be like, I'm trying to get, call to get in touch with the student's name. And just, I want to check and see how they're doing, see if there's anything that we can do to help them, if they need any supports. And I think when you present it that way to the parents or the student, that somebody cares about them and wants to help them, they're more open to, participating in the interview. And then I can pretty much I do it as a conversation with them, more than, a dry interview, the question, second question. I do it more just in a conversation, and I can pull that information from them in that way, and I complete the interview as I'm doing that.
Do you see differences between when you're talking to a parent versus when you're talking to a student, or are they pretty much the same?
Sometimes it's because I will talk to the parent because maybe the student's at work or something. So while I've got the parent on the phone, I'm going to go ahead and get as much information for that interview as I can. So I'll fill it out, and then I'll put in there, that they said they're going to have the student to call me back. A lot of times the student will call me back. So I'll go back through that process and redo it with the student. And the thing that probably is the most different is the parent feels like the student needs a whole lot more help than the student feels like they need. So
thanks. That's an interesting strategy I hadn't considered, that you do part of the interview with the parent and part of the interview with the student, but it sounds like it can work in certain situations. What kind of time commitment do you think you have to commit to this if we're talking to other districts, and we're trying to say, hey, you can get a response rate that really goes up a whole lot. How much time are you investing in that? And both in terms of trying to reach the former student, doing the actual interview, collecting the contact information, all those kinds of things, tracking them down. So a major commitment, something that doesn't take as long as people might think. What would you say to that?
I think it depends. We have those layers that are in place. So at the school level, when we start there, I don't think the time commitment is really heavy duty, because we try not to start until at least May. And sometimes we still have ARCs going on. And so, trying to balance that time, I think it seems more hectic than really the amount of time you spend making a phone call. So, because some kids you'll get on the first time, walking through the interview, and Dana certainly, because she does those, can talk a little more about that. But I did set up some systems in place. For example, the summary of performance that the kids get, all of those are scanned into me per high school into a Google Drive. So when we do our first layer, which is at the school, I can do a second layer while I'm going through those, which is sometimes adding contact information or just reviewing those even, and saying, hey, like I could email Dana and say, hey, this kid's summary performance doesn't have a whole lot of information on it. Can you see what else you can gather? Because oftentimes kids that still exist at school know the seniors from last year. So we really do focus on that piece of paperwork. And I don't know that that's too time consuming, just because you have so many resources, like you have your teachers in the building that may know what that kid is doing to add to that information. So all through the current school year, we may be adding information as we're building up to yo-yo. So it doesn't all hit you at once, if that makes sense. We start talking about that summary of performance, of course, the year before, and then keep filling it in throughout the year. So that's kind of how the district supports.
And did I interpret correctly that you're kind of storing that information on a Google Drive that you're updating throughout the year?
Mm-hmm. I have them all
scanned.
scanned. Well, and the reason is because if Dana's the closer, I've got to make sure that as the closer, she has as much information as I can get to her, if that makes sense, because she's going to be calling these other schools. And so I want to make sure that she has everything. And I've done all the research for her before it kind of gets to her. And then she starts with the diggery, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, now when I start doing when I try to find the ones that haven't been able to get contacted, that takes a little bit more time, because like I will research on, social media. I'll look for relatives, parents on social media, tell them I'm trying to get in contact with so-and-so. And a lot of times, they'll provide me information. Like I'll call any and all the numbers that are on, Infinite Campus for that student. So that part takes a lot of time. The actual interview, because like where I have it down to kind of a conversation, doesn't take as long for me as it might for others that are kind of, not as used to or not as involved in the yo-yo. Because like I said, I've done it for like a number of years. So I'm really comfortable with it. And I usually have a pretty good relationship with parents, especially, my Dunbar parents.
And I think time commitment, Dana, her contract ends with a teacher, but I'd say maybe 2 weeks into the summer, just spreading out your time, not a 6.5 hour day, but just being able to make those phone calls. So I think if you have the ability to have somebody, to work a couple of weeks beyond, whether that be a teacher or not, I think they can do that closing, because we probably have about, Dana usually gets a number somewhere between maybe 30 and 40 kids to follow up on. So we usually have about 200 plus graduates each year, maybe 210, 230, somewhere. We've kind of fall in between there. And so 2 weeks really allows her time, I think, to just follow up and really get those kids that we've got to make a hard push to get their responses.
Well, I know you've touched on this kind of throughout our conversation already, but I'll just ask if you have advice to give to districts that are struggling to get their response rate up. What would you say to any of those districts?
I just don't give up.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep digging. Like I don't do just 3 contacts and say, well, I couldn't contact them. I mean, I may have up to as many as 20, 30 contacts for a student.
And you're not just trying the same number over and over again. It sounds like you're trying different methods.
I text and, I'll send the student a text, the parent a text. I send Facebook messages. I'll, shoot them a message on Twitter or Instagram. And then my nephew has a degree in Spanish. So like I'll send him a text and ask him to translate that for me. And so he'll send it back to me, and I'll do that with my Hispanic students. And I get a lot of return from that as well.
I guess my advice is, Fayette County, we're, like I said, we have a lot of data, but I think part of it is that my advice would be, this really becomes a passion of yours to know where kids are. I think that's why I got into teaching, if I think back, is for kids to be successful after high school. And so it's kind of satisfying to find that out from a personal level. I think the advice for a director of special ed, in a smaller district, is really find somebody that can build those relationships, have those community connections, those kind of things, because that personal touch, or that just, how's everybody doing? somebody that has the background to make sure when somebody says, well, things aren't going so well, when you get that factor, is somebody that has the ability to respond in a very genuine way and say, let's talk about that a little, and then go on to your yo-yo. Because I think if you just hit that so hard, I don't think families feel that connection with a school system that they may have been with for, 17 years, 18 years, and, for kids in grade 14, much longer. So I think Dana's response, and several of my ACCs have that response, is just that genuine factor of who you choose to do yo-yo. I know we've talked about that for years at HDI, and it's not always about position. I had to start thinking about who had the initial connection, who had the initial relationships. One day it may be some teachers that might need to do yo-yo if our response rate falls or our structures in Fayette County shift. So you have to really, in your district, examine your structures and who really contacts families. Who do they respond to? Because that could be different offices throughout your district structure. So it's really just been something we've been able to put together and find good connections and relationships. And like I said, even the telephone number, because I know Dana would call sometimes from home. Well, as simple as that sounds, most people aren't going to answer that random phone number that comes, or that Google Voice that you set up. But I don't want her at Dunbar High School at 1 a.m. Making phone calls. But that's the reality is, we don't do that. And so many parents now have, I don't know that a lot of kids know what landlines are, to be honest. So, but they know social media, they know cell phones. And Fayette County, we have a pretty good sized transient population. So tracking is, you need somebody with the skill of tracking people down. We laugh all the time about it's kind of like this opportunity to stalk our students and just find them. But there's a joy at the end of that, I think, because we have such great stories, and Dana shares those with the other ACCs of the kid they tracked down maybe from Henry Clay High School, and they're like, that's great news. So I think emphasizing that and the accomplishments of our kids and the accomplishments that special ed has. We don't have a lot of wins sometimes in special ed with certain areas, but this has definitely been a win for Fayette County Public Schools.
So my last question is kind of moves beyond just the response rate that has been so great. And that is, we don't encourage people to get high response rates just because we like high response rates. We encourage them to do so because, like you said, it's actionable data, and you can have more confidence in your data when you have a really good response rate. So how has a high response rate, and you had one last year too, enabled you to plan for better transition outcomes for your students?
One of the things in Fayette County is every year we visit that data, we put it together, and we compare the data from last year. And we're always trying to meet the state. We're always trying to meet at least the state and at least our co-op response rate and indicators, 14A, B, and C. But one of the things that really helps us do is program plan. For example, when we look at our students with intellectual disabilities and their transition to, opportunities both in employment or college, we really have to decide, is that program working? So are my employment trainers getting the outcomes that we need? Because really they're the last feeder for that yo-yo data. And so when I start looking at students, even by disability, I think sometimes I've asked you, can we break down the data, or can I get the raw data? Is really digging in, are we addressing the employment or school outcomes for our kids with autism? I think one year I started looking at the data, and I found a lot of data that we were not being successful with our kids in the category of emotional behavioral disorder. And that often comes with no cognitive markers in many ways. And so why are they not employable? So we kind of get our data, and I have a small team of us that sit down and look at that data and say, what are we missing? Or, what is our data really, I guess, saying to us? because we are very fortunate in Fayette County that we can have employment trainers and job coaches. And we can shift programs at some of our high schools because that's more of a district opportunity than the schools have. It also shifts the training that we do for our teachers. For example, in our MSD programs, we built multiple programs. We'll be opening at Tates Creek High School next year, a life skills center that will be focused on arena assessment for employment. And over the years and the data that I've presented have allowed us to build this model. And that'll be based on the predictors for post-secondary employment, the research around that. So, definitely it's a program shift. I won't say it's a change. We don't throw things out very easily. In any district, I think you kind of hold on to things, but it does allow us to have more meaningful conversations around why is this population not being successful or going on to college. We have a program here that I think many districts may have is Opportunity Middle College. And what we noticed when we got our yo-yo data back, that we didn't have a lot of kids typically transitioning on to college, even though we have that opportunity beginning their junior year. So I was able to put a transition person in place along with pre-eds, all of that different funding. I was able to put a person in place that's going to recruit and get kids there, work with them on the campus, those kind of things. That would have been hard to do years ago because what data would have pointed to that being a need. So I think that's the importance. If I can share with anybody the advice or movement and the importance of yo-yo, it's that, because our whole outcomes are about graduation, increasing our graduation rate, decreasing our dropout rate. And if you're not using that yo-yo data, you're not hitting those two indicators either. So I just, for the sake of data, I don't like to just collect it and have it, but I try to find the value in it. And I try to emphasize, like to Dana, I think she sees the value in yo-yo now as much as I do at a district level. It's not just an indicator for us. It's just not a checklist and an activity. It's something that brings us our good news and our level of improvement. And that's how schools are structured now for everything. And so improvement's got to be the next step. So.
That's a great point. I mean, I would hate if districts thought of this as a compliance indicator, because it's definitely not. It's results, and it's well, what can you do with this to improve lives? And that's what we're all about. It's not about checking boxes and getting good response rates, although that helps us do what we need to do.
Yeah, it's nice to get a response, like even just from you when you're talking about, hey, your response rate is great. That's great to hear, because as educators, you don't always hear those things. So.
Well, that's the last question that I had. So unless anyone else has anything they want to share, I think this has been a great conversation.
One thing that I do, and I don't even know if Rachel knows that I do this,
The secret
is when I'm, doing the interviews with the parents or students, I kind of keep a journal. And if the kid needs support in something, I know who the OVR counselors are for each school, because Rachel supplies that to all the ACCs. And so I'll reach out to, whoever covers Henry Clay, and I'll say, hey, I just did, a yo-yo interview with this student, and this is some of their needs. And, they were referred to OVR, but hadn't heard anything back, or, they couldn't do something at that time, can you follow up with them? And we've had a lot of good follow up with that. And then I will also go back in September, usually first part of October, and I'll call them back myself and say, hey, did OVR follow up with you? Is there anything else you need? So I kind of do that follow up with them myself if they needed any assistance.
Great. And that's the kind of stuff that doesn't even show up on the yo-yo, but it's
Right.
But it is improving the lives of young people. Thank you for doing that.
All right, Dr. Lobianco, it looks like it's time for us to put a bow ribbon on our our version of Great Conversations, correct?
So,
Ed, fantastic. just wonderful. And you are the quintessential moderator. I am just delighted at listening to this conversation and all the rich information. Cannot thank you enough for your expertise, your passion, and your graciousness with your time. Thank you, Miss Rachel Baker. Thank you, Miss Dana Hamilton. Thank you, Dr. Tony Lobianco. And if we don't have any parting comments, we will adjourn.